Well, it was interesting, and I'm trying to figure out where the passion and energy came from. And I sort of look back to when it was 14-0, and Bill Belichick went with the drop kick to try to mortar it on the ensuing kickoff. And I think that was a sign of disrespect. And I really think it woke up the Eagles sideline and said, this is getting ridiculous. Let's play. This is a slap in our face. So I think it's one of those rare points in Bill Belichick's career where you can point at him and say he made some serious mistakes, that being one of them. But, give the Eagles credit. They played well. Strange way to win a game, obviously, with 2 special teams touchdowns and a defensive touchdown. And when that happens, generally it doesn't matter who you're playing. You're going to win. Can't necessarily count on that from week to week, as we always talk about. And to me, the offense is still the offense. 120 yards passing from Sam Bradford. Now, the mistakes weren't there. There were some key throws. The pass to Riley Cooper was a darn good one and should have put the game away if Kenyon Barner didn't follow. And I think the biggest thing you take out of it as far as Chip Kelly is concerned is that he did tweak some things. Despite saying he wasn't going to make any changes. It starts with DeMarco Murray, but there were also Jonathan Krause playing at wide receiver, Ed Reynolds taking over for Chris Maragos, which I'm going to be writing about today. And that was one of the real keys, because that had a domino effect. Not only was Reynolds in the game on the defensive side for 79 snaps, that enabled Maragos to go back to what he does best, play special teams only, and there you have it. He's got the block punt that turns into a touchdown.
Miles Austin cut today. He was deactivated yesterday. I think a lot of people aren't putting a lot of stock into that move. It's just like, oh, it was Miles Austin. Who cares? But I thought it spoke to that there was finally some accountability held, that this guy hasn't been playing well. He hasn't run great routes. He hasn't caught the football. And now you're being sat for that. I thought that was at least a message to some of the guys. It doesn't have to be the biggest star on the team that gets reprimanded to send a message. So I applaud them for doing that yesterday. And then today, now he's cut. I'll give him double points for that. Did you feel that deactivating Austin was a message?
Well, I think the bigger message, because he was an ancillary player, I think the bigger message was DeMarco Murray and the fact that he had so few touches, and that Darren Sproles not only had more, but also Kenyon Barner had more. So I think that, because he is the perceived, and I put this in air quotations, star player of this offense, hasn't worked out that way. And Chip at least said to the people, look, we're going to change some things up, and people, if they don't deserve to play, they're not going to play despite their contract. So I think Austin also spoke to that, as you mentioned, but I think it's a much bigger deal when you're willing to sit down the big money player who you can't necessarily cut, but it doesn't matter on Sundays. If you're not performing, let's put in the guy who is performing.
Yeah, and I agree. I thought, and I was going to get to the Murray, obviously, I thought that was a great message. That my concern is what Chip said today, and Scott was on earlier, and he made a comment saying it was a different Chip Kelly, but the same Chip Kelly in the press conference yesterday and today, and that worries me, and I agree with him. Is Chip going to go right back to his evil ways and say, I signed Murray, he's the guy, or do you think he legitimately will start phasing him out, realizing that he's not the right fit for at least this year's team?
Yeah, I think it's more the latter, and we'll see, because Scott's right. Chip kind of scaled it back and said it was just a matchup thing, and we'll see. And this week's game against Buffalo will tell the tale, because if it's back to normal, then it's an issue. I don't see that. I thought that was lip service to kind of protect Murray, who obviously all players have egos, and I agree with the head coach doing that kind of thing as far as spinning it in the best way possible. And I think he was doing more of that today than signaling he's going to go back to what didn't work. because Sproles played well, obviously. It's later in the season. You don't have to worry about those touches accumulating. I think you can go for it, and hopefully at some point Ryan Matthews comes back. Barner obviously hurt himself with the late fumble, but played pretty well outside of that. So I don't think it is going to change, but we'll have to wait and see.
Right. We've seen Sproles in the past have games where he plays well and they give him more touches. And, they go away from him. And then people are saying, well, how come not more of Sproles? I'm interested to see when Matthews comes back, does Matthews kind of become the main guy and then Sproles, is kind of the secondary guy, and then they use Murray as kind of that short yardage, late game back?
Yeah, I would think Matthews would be the guy when he's able to come back and play, because we always talk about as good as Darren Sproles is, he just doesn't have the physical stature to handle NFL punishment week in and week out. As I said, that doesn't mean as much now because we're later in the season and we only have 4 games left, and you can kind of let everything hang out. But when you're talking a whole season, when you're talking about September games, I think if you're the head coach and Darren Sproles is on the team, you have to be very aware that you have to limit his touches if you want him around for the entire season.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. Now, you start the article off in an interesting way. You say this isn't the way it's supposed to work, but the embattled Eagles stun the Patriots with a pair of special teams touchdowns. But isn't that what the Eagles have been successful with in the Kelly era? Special team scores and defensive scores. Isn't that kind of how this team has been successful with Kelly?
Well, it has, and that's the concern. You give them credit. I mean, don't take it away from them, because they have been the best team in football over the last 2 years, developing those kinds of scores. So they obviously pay attention to detail and deserve the credit for being able to garner so many points in interesting ways as opposed to other teams in this league. But as I said, it doesn't matter how good you are on special teams. It doesn't matter how good you are defensively. If the opposing team handles its own business, you're not going to be able to get scores like that week after week after week. And that's where the consistent aspect of relying on it is just not a prudent way to move forward.
Yes.
At some point, this team's got to be better offensively. I mean, that's why Chip Kelly was brought here. And I saw no evidence of them being better offensively other than the fact that Bradford didn't make mistakes, didn't make the game-changing mistake, made a few good throws. Really, the only egregious throw was the overthrow to Zach Ertz that could have been an interception, but worked out for Philadelphia in the middle of the field. Still 120 yards passing, though, Mike. And that's not good enough to win consistently in this league.
No, it's not. No, it's not. Well, I will say this. How much of, and Chip kind of alluded to this today, how much is the lack of statistics based on the fact that they had multiple special teams touchdowns and a defensive score, which limited the amount of touches they had on offense?
Part of it was they didn't have as many plays as they normally run. There's no question about it. But I don't see how anybody can watch that offense and assume if that didn't happen, all of a sudden Bradford would have spiked up to 300 yards passing. I don't see any evidence of that. At one point,
and I agree with you there, by the way.
Yeah. At one point in the third quarter, the Eagles scored. It was 14-0 Eagles in that particular quarter, and they had run 3 offensive plays for 1 yard. So give credit to the special teams. Give credit to the defense, which gave up that long drive, but Walter Thurman made the big play. Malcolm Jenkins picked it off and took it to the house, and that completely changed momentum of the game. But as we look forward and we try to lock down this division, at some point this passing game's got to start making plays. And I think Sam Bradford is improving. I think slowly and surely before the injury, he was playing his best football. He comes back after the injury. There was a little rust, but for the most part, he was solid, if unspectacular. But we've talked about it all the way back to training camp. This wide receiver group is just not very good. Krause adds some at least new life to that group, but he only had 8 snaps, I think, as a whole. So it was still Matthews, Cooper, Josh Huff, Nelson Aguilar. And as I pointed in one of my articles, of the 122 rated receivers in the NFL this year by Pro Football Focus, Nelson Aguilar was 122 coming into this game. So that's how poorly that group has been as a whole. And they made it. Matthews had the touchdown. Cooper had the big catch, as I said. And those are positives, but we need more of that consistently throughout the game.
And as somebody tweeted out here, it kind of makes you scratch your head. How much better would this Eagles team be with Maclin at $11 million rather than Austin at $2.3 and Murray at $8? And obviously you can't go back and change those things, but it goes back to Chip Kelly, the GM, really making a mistake, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, letting Jeremy Maclin get to free agency was a big mistake, and it showed sort of the inexperience he has in that particular position, because once he got to free agency, it was twofold. You knew the Chiefs were out there. You knew they were looking for a receiver. You knew his old coach was there, the guy who drafted him. You knew he played college ball in the same state. All of that coming together, plus they were going to overpay him. You were going to lose him. So that's the kind of thing you got to lock up earlier. And the Eagles were unable to do it. And it is the biggest – when I look at this team and I look at all the mistakes personnel-wise, that's the biggest one, because that has been the biggest issue on this team, the wide receivers. And Jeremy Maclin, he's not a star, but he's a darn good one, and he's a vast improvement over anyone on this team right now.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. I said on Thursday's show, John, the team that wins the NFC East is going to have to upset somebody. Does that qualify yesterday as number one in upset and a win that suggests that Philadelphia can win the division now?
Sure. There's no question it's an upset. As banged up as the Patriots were, I don't know anyone on the planet who picked the Eagles to win that football game. I don't. And they deserve credit for going into probably the most difficult place to play in this league right now, and it has been since Belichick and Brady got together. They rarely lose 2 games in a row. All these things going against the Eagles, and we said dating back to last week, if you had to play the Patriots, this is when you wanted to play them. So understanding that, they were still able to do it. They were down by 2 touchdowns. There were a lot of great individual performances. I think that was Fletcher Cox's best game as a professional, and he's had some really good games. So that's how good he plays. I thought Brandon Graham was tremendous.
By the way, Fletcher Cox credited with 8 quarterback pressures yesterday of Tom Brady.
Yeah, he was constantly in Brady's face. And he really set the tone defensively, and I think guys like Barner and Graham kind of picked up on that, and they were all over. They had some of their best games of the year. Ed Reynolds came in, as we mentioned, guy who hasn't played. He had 13 NFL snaps before that game. He played 79 and held up pretty well, and the fact that he was out there, as I said, enabled Maragos to do what he does best and just focus on special teams, and that helped him.
Yeah.
And the punt return. Darren Sproles, when punters give Darren Sproles a chance, he's as good as it gets as far as returning punts.
John, you wrote during the week, it's sink or swim for Eric Rowe. What did he do?
Oh, he swam. He played tremendously. Now, it's a lot different. I was really, really surprised at how the people jumped all over Eric Rowe after Thanksgiving in Detroit, because I think he had tremendous coverage on Calvin Johnson, who's a Hall of Fame receiver, not an All-Pro receiver, not a Pro Bowl receiver, a Hall of Fame receiver. He had great coverage. He had a quarterback with a tremendous arm that threw a perfect pass, and one of the best receivers of all time beat a rookie who's barely played. That doesn't mean the coverage isn't good. Sometimes you have to tip your hat to the other team which also has some pretty good players. So I thought he played tremendously in a difficult circumstance in Detroit, and I think it carried over in New England against a far lesser degree of receivers. And he looks to me like he's going to be a very good outside cornerback in this league, and he's exactly what the Eagles want physically. So that's one real positive you can take out for this team in New England.
Yeah, John, and obviously they're going to turn their attention to this Bills game here and LaShawn McCoy coming back, and moving forward, they're going to kind of control some destiny here unless Washington wins out. I mean, they have a real chance here to have that Washington game on that Saturday night be a similar situation to where it was last year, where if they win that game, they kept themselves alive, and I think it's kind of setting itself up for a similar run down the stretch here that, hey, if you take care of your business in December, like we always kind of say, get to Thanksgiving, and then what you do afterwards, it seems like it's going to come down to that Saturday night between Philadelphia and Washington.
Yeah, I agree. I can't imagine the Washington Redskins winning 5 straight games. So there's going to be an opportunity here for somebody, whether it's as undeserved it might be for the Eagles and Giants and even the Cowboys. I can't believe we're saying this. But if they win this game tonight, they're right back in it. They are right back in the mix for what has been a very difficult division. The Eagles are at least playing meaningful football in December, and that's something. It's going to be difficult. Buffalo obviously is coming in. Shady is going to be very pumped up to play this team, obviously. Difficult game. And the schedule isn't exactly easy moving forward from there. But games are meaningful, even if it's only because the division is so bad.
Yeah, and it's funny, a couple of weeks ago I was saying don't count Dallas out. Then when Romo went down, I finally tapped out. But if they win tonight, and Eagles fans should be rooting for Dallas, find it in your heart to do it. If Dallas wins tonight, they'll be one game out and just about as big a part of this race as any other team in the NFC East. And as bad as New York was the other day, they are still alive and well. They've got a very tough schedule playing Carolina, Minnesota, obviously the game against Philadelphia on the last week there. But all 4, if Dallas wins tonight, all 4 teams are still in play. Who would have thought?
Yeah, it's amazing. And if you think about what Dallas has been without Tony Romo, the fact I always make fun of Jerry refuses to say they're out of it. I give him credit for this 100% right. His team is not out of it. Now, if they lose tonight, you can officially sound, the death knell. But if they win this game tonight, I could see the Cowboys pulling up the most unlikely division title in NFL history. That's how bad this division has been.
Yeah, and we'll see tonight that game right here on 97.3 ESPN. Well, Sixers owner Josh Harris is going to speak in about 7 minutes. Interesting to see what he'll have to say. We'll have that coming up for you tomorrow. John and I will be live at the Golden Nugget in Atlantic City. We will recap tonight's game and see what it means moving forward. Plenty of NFL topics on the docket for tomorrow as John and I live. For more from John, go to 97.3ESPN.com. And in the McMullen's Eagles coverage, click on that and get all the coverage for this week's Eagles-Bills matchup at Lincoln Financial Field. All right, man, I'll see you tomorrow.
All right, Mike.